I never thought I would see the day when my own daughter would look me in the eye and tell me I was a burden. For most of my life, I worked tirelessly to provide for her, making sure she had the best schools, the best clothes, and every opportunity she asked for. When my husband passed away, I thought that at least I still had her by my side, but it didn't take long for me to realize that her love for me came with conditions, and one of those conditions was tied directly to the house I lived in. The house had been our family home for more than 30 years, the place where birthdays were celebrated, where Christmas mornings were spent around the tree, and where my husband and I built the life that we had always dreamed of. To me, it was filled with memories. To my daughter, it was a piece of property with a dollar sign attached to it. It started subtly, with her casually mentioning how big the place was for just one person. She would say things like, "Mom, it must be hard to keep this house clean by yourself," or, "Don't you get lonely walking through all these empty rooms?" At first, I didn't think much of it, because she wasn't wrong. It was a large house, and since I was retired, I didn't always have visitors or things to fill the silence. But then her comments began to sharpen, and soon she stopped disguising them as concern. One day, she came right out and said, "Mom, don't you think it's time you considered moving into something smaller? Maybe even a retirement place where you won't have to worry about anything." The way she said it was coated in sugar, but her eyes betrayed her real intentions. I knew her well enough to see the greed tucked behind the false sweetness. Still, I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she truly thought she was helping me, I reasoned. But that hope evaporated the evening I overheard her speaking with her husband in the kitchen while they thought I was asleep upstairs. She was saying, if she sells the house, we could finally get ahead. We could pay off the car, put money away for a new place. She doesn't need all that space. She doesn't even use half the rooms. Honestly, she should just give it to us. We'd actually make good use of it. Her husband laughed and replied, "She's old, it won't be long before she's out of the picture anyway. Just keep nudging her. She'll cave. And if not, well, we'll figure out how to make her." I stood there in the dark hallway, my heart hammering in my chest, realizing that the people I loved most were plotting to push me out of the very home I had built for them. For the first time in my life, I saw my daughter not as the little girl I once carried on my hip, but as a woman who had let greed rot her sense of family. I wanted to storm into the kitchen and confront them right then, but something stopped me. Maybe it was shock, maybe it was hurt, but deep down, I think it was the spark of an idea that told me this was not something to fight with words. If they thought I was weak, if they thought I was stupid, then I would let them believe that. Sometimes the best revenge isn't immediate, it's when you let people walk themselves straight into their own downfall. The next morning, I played my part. When my daughter asked if I'd considered what we talked about, I let my shoulders slump inside. "Maybe you're right," I said softly. "The house is too much for me. I'll think about selling." The way her eyes lit up made me want to cry, but I forced myself to smile. From that day forward, I acted more confused, more dependent, and more tired than I really was. I wanted her to believe she was winning, that I was caving in, that she was about to get everything she wanted. All the while, I was quietly putting my real plan into motion. I called an old friend of mine who worked in real estate and asked her to come by the house when no one else was around. She walked through the place, evaluated it, and told me it was worth much more than I'd ever imagined. In today's market, the house could fetch a fortune. I listened carefully, asked all the right questions, and told her I wanted everything handled discreetly. She promised she'd line up buyers and that the process could move quickly if I was ready. I told her I was more than ready. What my daughter didn't know was that while she was pushing me to sign the house over or let her help manage the sale, I was already making sure she would never touch a penny of it. A week later, she brought me a stack of papers, saying she had spoken to a friend who could get me a great deal on the house if I sold quickly. She wanted me to sign without reading the details, assuring me it was just standard paperwork. I pretended to squint at the pages and said my eyes were too tired to read the fine print. Maybe tomorrow, I told her. She looked annoyed, but she smiled through gritted teeth. I knew exactly what she was doing, trying to trick me into signing over the house at a price that would benefit her, not me. What she didn't know was that my lawyer already had every legal detail lined up to protect me. When she left that day, muttering under her breath about how slow I was, I sat at the dining table and let the weight of it all sink in. My own child had tried to trick me, had plotted behind my back, and had dismissed me as a helpless old woman who couldn't possibly see through her lies. If that was how little she thought of me, then she had no idea who she was really dealing with. Because what she didn't realize was that I was about to sell the house on my terms, walk away with more money than she had ever dreamed of, and disappear from her world long enough for her to finally understand what it meant to underestimate me. That night, as I closed the curtains and turned off the lights, I whispered to myself, "You wanted to get rid of me, but I'll make sure it's you who ends up empty-handed." It was the first time in years I'd gone to bed smiling. The following weeks were a delicate balancing act, and I had to play my role with the precision of a seasoned actress. Every time my daughter stopped by, I let my movements be slower, my voice softer, and my memory fuzzier. I pretended to lose track of conversations, set my reading glasses down in the wrong place, and sometimes asked her to remind me of things she'd said just a few hours earlier. The more vulnerable I acted, the more confident she became. She thought she was in control. She thought she was clever. And in her arrogance, she stopped hiding her intentions. One afternoon, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with her husband, the same table where we had shared countless family meals, and they laid it out bluntly. "Mom," she said, placing her hand over mine like she was the most loving daughter in the world, "we've been thinking. This house is too much for you, and we're worried. What if something happens while you're here alone? What if you fall down the stairs and no one finds you? We just want what's best for you." Her husband leaned in, smiling that fake smile that always made me want to shudder, and added, "We found a wonderful retirement community not far from here. It's safe, they cook for you, they clean, and you'll never be lonely. Doesn't that sound nice?" I wanted to laugh in their faces, but instead, I sighed and let my shoulders slump forward. "Maybe you're right," I murmured. "Maybe I can't keep this place up anymore." The way they exchanged quick, victorious glances told me everything. They thought the war was won, but I had already moved my most sentimental belongings, photo albums, keepsakes, small treasures, into a storage unit across town, paying in cash so there would be no paper trail. I had already signed the agreement with the realtor, who had lined up not just one, but 3 interested buyers. And I had already met with my lawyer, who made sure every cent from the sale would be secured in an account only I could access. When I told them I would think about the retirement community, they both practically leapt with joy. They started showing me glossy pamphlets, circling features like weekly bingo nights and on-site medical staff. They tried to paint a picture of a golden old age, but I could see the impatience in their eyes. They weren't thinking about bingo nights, they were picturing the check they thought was coming their way once the house was in their hands. I nodded and smiled, pretending to be reassured, and agreed to go on a tour with them. The tour was a charade. The place smelled faintly of disinfectant and stale food, the walls were painted a dull beige, and the rooms felt more like cages than homes. As I walked through, my daughter kept saying things like, "See, Mom. Isn't this cozy, and you'd make so many friends here." I pretended to be impressed, even going so far as to say, "This really could work." Inside, I was seething. To them, I was just a burden to be stored away, hidden out of sight, while they enjoyed the fruits of my labor. But if that was the game they wanted to play, I was about to show them just how ruthless I could be when pushed. The house sold faster than even my realtor expected. The market was hot, and the buyers were eager. Within weeks, I had signed the papers, accepted an offer far above the asking price, and transferred the funds to my lawyer's care. I didn't breathe a word to my daughter. Instead, I played along with her timeline. She thought she had months to slowly nudge me into moving out, but I was already gone in every way that mattered. When the sale was finalized, I told her that the retirement home had called with a sudden opening. They said if I don't take it now, I'll lose the spot, I explained, wringing my hands like I was nervous. Her face lit up like Christmas morning. "That's perfect, Mom," she exclaimed. "Don't worry, we'll take care of everything here." Her husband smirked, already imagining the profit. They didn't ask questions about the logistics. They didn't even realize that by the time I moved out, the house was no longer mine to give. I packed 2 suitcases, just enough to look believable, and told them I'd be staying at the retirement home while everything was settled. Instead, I booked a flight. The moment my plane lifted off the ground, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was free. Free from their manipulations, free from the weight of pretending, and free to start a new life that was mine alone. The first few weeks felt like a dream. I traveled across Europe, visiting places my husband and I had once talked about seeing but never got the chance. I walked along the Seine in Paris, took a boat ride in Venice, and stood beneath the Eiffel Tower as the light sparkled. Every night, I sent a quick message to my daughter, settling in nicely. "Don't worry about me." I could practically hear her celebrating on the other end, thinking she was one step closer to cashing in. She had no idea the house was gone and that every dollar was sitting safely in my account, funding my freedom. But life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. In Spain, I met someone. He was a widower, kind and charming, with a mischievous sense of humor that made me laugh in a way I hadn't in years. We started sharing meals, then trips, and before long, he was part of my adventure. For the first time since my husband passed away, I felt alive, truly alive. We didn't talk about the past much, we were too busy making new memories. Months passed before my daughter's tone began to change. At first, she was cheerful, asking how I was doing. But soon her messages turned impatient. "When are you coming back? We need to talk about the house. There are things that need to be handled." I ignored her questions, replying only with vague answers about being busy or tired. Finally, after nearly 6 months, she sent a furious message, "Mom, this isn't fair. We need to know what's happening with the house. You can't just leave us in the dark like this." I almost laughed out loud. The entitlement in her words was staggering. She truly believed my life and my home existed to serve her. She thought she had me cornered, that she had outsmarted me. But what she didn't realize was that by the time she figured out the truth, it would already be too late. The house was gone, the money was mine, and I had built a new life with someone who actually valued me. The thought of her face when she finally realized what I had done was sweeter than any dessert I tasted on my travels. I wasn't just getting revenge. I was reclaiming my freedom. And I wasn't about to stop there. It was sometime around the 7th month of my travels that my daughter's carefully constructed patience finally snapped. I woke up one morning to a flood of angry messages filling my phone. "Mom, I just drove by the house and there's a for sale sign in the yard. What is going on? Why didn't you tell me you were selling? Who did you sell it to? Why wasn't I included in this?" The texts kept coming, dozens of them, all in rapid fire, as if the more words she threw at me, the faster she could undo what had already been done. I scrolled through them calmly while sipping a cappuccino in a little cafe overlooking a bustling square in Rome. The world moved at its own rhythm around me, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't chained to her expectations or her anger. She had finally discovered what I'd been keeping from her all along, and I could almost imagine her face as she pulled up to the house, expecting to see it empty and waiting for her to move in, only to find that it no longer belonged to me, or to her. The shock must have been delicious. The fury, even more so. But I didn't respond. I let her stew in the silence. Sometimes silence is the loudest answer you can give, and I wanted her to feel the weight of it. Days passed before I finally received a call instead of a text. I let it ring twice before I answered, my voice calm and even, while hers came shrieking through the receiver. How could you do this to me? To us? That was supposed to be our future. You had no right. I closed my eyes and listened, every word confirming what I had known all along. She hadn't cared about my well-being, or whether I was happy. She cared only about what I could give her. When she finally paused to catch her breath, I said quietly, it was my house. My decision. And I don't owe you a dime. The silence on her end was deafening for a moment, before it erupted again into accusations, insults, even tears. She tried everything, anger, guilt, pleading, but none of it touched me anymore. I had spent too long letting her words dictate my worth, and I was finished with that chapter. I hung up mid-rant and turned my phone off for the rest of the day. I refused to let her poison reach me while I was standing in front of centuries-old ruins, marveling at the beauty of history that had survived far longer than any family feud ever could. By then, my life had taken on a rhythm of its own. Mornings were spent exploring new cities with the man I had come to care for deeply, afternoons lingering over meals and wine, and evenings watching sunsets in places I'd only ever seen in travel magazines. He made me laugh, made me feel wanted, and reminded me that I was still capable of being more than just someone's aging mother. For so long, I had believed that my best years were behind me, but here I was, in my 60s, rediscovering joy in ways I'd never thought possible. When he asked me one evening, beneath a sky scattered with stars, if I'd ever consider marrying again, my first instinct was to laugh. But then I saw the sincerity in his eyes and realized he wasn't just asking out of romance, he was asking because he wanted to build a future with me. A future not defined by children or obligations, but by choice. And for the first time in years, I said yes to something without hesitation. We were married quietly in a small ceremony abroad, just the two of us and a couple of witnesses we met along the way. There were no elaborate dresses, no flowers, no grand reception. Just vows spoken with honesty, promises made with conviction, and two people choosing each other freely. I didn't tell my daughter. Why would I? She had made it clear that my happiness didn't matter to her. And so, I kept this new chapter of my life separate, untainted by her bitterness. Back home, she must have been unraveling. Friends of hers began reaching out, confused and concerned, asking if I was all right. They had heard rumors, seen the house listed and sold, and couldn't make sense of why I had vanished so completely. I replied sparingly, letting them know I was fine, happy even, but not offering details. The less that filtered back to her, the better. I wanted her to sit in that uncertainty, to wonder if maybe she had pushed me so far away that I had cut her out completely. Because, in truth, that's exactly what had happened. The irony of it all was that while she scrambled to find a rental she could afford after her expectations of inheriting my home fell apart, I was driving along the Amalfi Coast in a rented convertible, the wind in my hair and my husband's laughter beside me. I thought about her sometimes, yes, but not with guilt anymore. If anything, I thought about the lesson she was learning, the one I had hoped she'd never have to. That greed corrodes relationships. That entitlement blinds people to gratitude. And that sometimes, when you push too hard, the person you thought you were manipulating is actually the one pulling the strings. By the time autumn rolled around, my daughter's messages had shifted from outrage to desperation. She wrote things like, "Mom, we're really struggling. Please, can't you help us? Just a little money, or, you don't understand how hard it's been without the house. We thought we could count on you." The words, "count on you," burned like acid. They hadn't counted on me, they'd counted on what they thought they could take from me. And now that it was gone, they were left to face the reality they had built for themselves. I didn't reply. I didn't owe her answers anymore. Instead, I invested in myself. I opened accounts in countries I visited, spread my savings wisely, and bought a small villa overlooking the sea. It wasn't extravagant, but it was mine, truly mine, and it represented everything I had earned through careful planning and sheer resilience. I filled its rooms not with reminders of the past, but with new memories, photographs of places I had been, souvenirs from adventures I never thought I'd have. My life was no longer defined by what had been taken from me, but by what I had chosen to build. Sometimes, as I sipped coffee on the balcony, watching the waves crash below, I thought about how my daughter must have felt the moment she realized she had lost everything she thought was guaranteed. She had wanted to get rid of me, to tuck me away somewhere and take the house for herself. Instead, she had rid herself of me in the worst way possible, because now I was gone, not out of weakness, but out of choice. And she would never again be able to look at me as the helpless woman she believed she could manipulate. I didn't know it then, but the day would come when I would return, just briefly, and everything would come full circle. And when it did, the look on her face would make every careful step of my plan worth it. It was almost a year to the day since I had left when I decided it was time to return, not because I missed my daughter, but because I wanted closure. I had lived a year that felt like 3 lifetimes, traveling, laughing, falling in love again, and rediscovering parts of myself I thought had been buried with my husband's passing. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, but part of me wanted my daughter to see with her own eyes that I hadn't disappeared into a corner of some retirement home. I wanted her to see what her greed had cost her. We flew back quietly, my husband and I, and rented a car at the airport. Not just any car, a gleaming luxury vehicle, the kind my daughter used to point out in magazines and say, "Someday, I'll have one of those." As I sat behind the wheel and adjusted the mirrors, I couldn't help but smile. The symbolism was too perfect. For years, she had believed I was too weak to drive my own life, too dependent to make my own choices. But here I was, in full control, steering myself exactly where I wanted to go. When we pulled up to her modest rental, I almost didn't recognize her. She came to the door with tired eyes, her hair messy, her face drawn tight with stress. It struck me then how much her life had unraveled in my absence. She had gambled everything on the belief that I would fold to her pressure, and instead she had lost not just the house, but the easy life she thought was hers by right. The moment she saw me step out of the car, her mouth fell open. For a second, she just stared, like she couldn't believe I was real. Then her eyes darted to the car, to my clothes, to the man who stepped out beside me, holding my hand with a quiet confidence. Her shock twisted into anger so quickly it was almost comical. "What is this?" she demanded. "Where have you been? Who is he? And how on earth are you driving that car?" I let her words wash over me, standing tall and calm, no longer the fragile woman she thought she could manipulate. My husband squeezed my hand gently, silently reminding me to speak only the truth I had carried with me for months. "This," I said slowly, "is my life now. The one you tried to take from me. You wanted me out of that house so badly, and you got your wish. But you didn't get the house. I sold it. I sold it for more money than you ever imagined, and I built a life of my own. A life without your schemes, without your manipulation, and without your entitlement." Her face turned red, and for a moment she looked like she might explode. "You can't do that," she shouted, her voice cracking. "That house was supposed to be mine. I needed it. I counted on it. How could you just throw everything away like that?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice so she had to lean in to hear. "It was never yours," I said. "You thought I was weak, that I wouldn't see through you. But you underestimated me. That house was mine to give or to keep, and I chose to turn it into freedom. You wanted to get rid of me, but all you managed to do was rid me of the guilt I used to carry for raising someone who saw me only as a paycheck. You don't get to claim what you never earned." For the first time, she had no immediate reply. She stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words that wouldn't come. Her husband appeared behind her in the doorway, his expression sour, as if he had been counting on the house just as much as she had. He glared at me, then at the car, then at my husband, and finally slunk back inside without saying a word. Cowardice always reveals itself when there's nothing left to gain. When she finally spoke again, her voice was smaller, weaker. But, what about me? What about us? Don't you care that we're struggling? Don't you care about your own daughter? There was a time those words would have broken me, but not anymore. I looked at her and saw not a daughter in need, but a woman reaping the consequences of her choices. I cared, I said softly. I cared for decades. I gave you everything I had. But love is not a blank check, and I won't let you bankrupt me emotionally or financially anymore. You had a mother who would have done anything for you, and instead of cherishing that, you tried to use it. That was your mistake, not mine. She burst into tears then, real or fake I couldn't tell, and tried to grab my arm. Please, Mom, don't do this. We can start over. We can figure something out. I gently pulled away. I already started over, I said, glancing at my husband, whose steady presence reminded me of the strength I'd found. And I'm happier now than I've been in years. You made your choices, and I made mine. This is goodbye. I turned and walked back to the car, sliding into the driver's seat with a calmness that felt like victory. As I pulled away, I caught one last glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, standing on the porch, tears streaking down her face, watching as the mother she thought she had control over drove away in a life she would never touch. The silence in the car was comforting, not heavy. My husband reached over and placed his hand on mine, and I knew I had finally closed the door on a chapter that had weighed on me for too long. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't hiding. I had faced her, spoken my truth, and walked away on my terms. For months, she had wanted to get rid of me, to push me into a box where she didn't have to think about me unless it benefited her. And in the end, she succeeded in one way: I was gone from her life. But not in the way she expected. I wasn't tucked away in a retirement home, waiting for her visits that would never come. I wasn't alone in an empty house, struggling with upkeep and loneliness. I was free, alive, and starting a new chapter with someone who saw me as a partner, not a burden. Sometimes revenge isn't about screaming or fighting or proving someone wrong. Sometimes it's simply about living well in spite of the people who wanted you to fail. My daughter thought she could measure my worth in bricks and beams, in dollar signs and inheritance. But what she learned, what I made sure she learned, is that my worth isn't something she can buy, steal, or inherit. My worth is mine, and I claimed it back. She wanted to get rid of me. Instead, I got rid of her entitlement. And in its place, I found a happiness she will never know.